Millennials think they can go in on the first day and talk to the CEO about what's on their mind. The Gen X manager thinks, what are you doing? Yeah, I got to say, I've been there, done that. I've managed a lot of people in my life, a lot of people. I've been in managerial positions in several different professions, and I have to agree with this. But they both say that it's only natural for millennials to feel that way, given how their boomer parents raised them to believe their voice matters. If a manager asks a Gen X employee to jump, the employee then asks, was that high enough? But if a manager asks a millennial employee to jump, the employee is more likely to furrow an eyebrow and ask, why? Have you come across this in your workplace? The Gen X versus the Gen Y? Maybe you're a baby boomer and you're still in the workforce, and there's a Gen Y that has come in, and you just kind of don't relate to them. Senderoff, who's the Gen Y, says that even her best millennial employees will react in that manner. She says it may feel like a mutiny, but it's not. The millennial has been raised in an environment in which she's encouraged to engage and question authority. Why would she accept a lesser bargain in the workplace? Bear in mind, again, that millennials are the offspring of boomer parents who spent their formative adult years questioning authority. Gutfrein says that managers thus need to understand the benefit of shifting from a command and control style to a more inclusive management philosophy. There's a different set of motivations among them. They describe Xers as a very individualistic generation. They were very independent. They wanted to get the corner office and the trappings of success. I agree. I agree with that 100%. Millennials, in contrast, they want to find a purpose in their toil and their career, which does not necessarily come from getting the highest possible salary or the nicest office. Okay. Gen X lives to work. Gen Y works to live. Gen Y has multiple passions and is more global than any of its predecessors, as 70% of them say they would like to work abroad sometime over the course of their lives. This is causing communication problems in the workplace. This is causing communications problem in the workplace, and millennials are focused on making meaning, not just money. So how can these Gen Xers relate to the Gen Yers, if you will? There's a desire for a different sort of work environment. Have you come across this in your workplace? 415-808-0810 is the number. 80-8810 is the number. We always hear about this, right? Every time a new generation enters the workforce. We'll talk about it with Gail Goodman coming up out of the top of the hour break. KGO, the place to turn for news. KGO, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland. We are closing in on 12 o'clock.
Get the latest traffic updates on KGO 810.
And good Sunday afternoon. Matt Ray sitting in, KGO Radio 810, taking your calls at 415-808-0810. 80-8810 is the number. Before we went to the break, we were discussing the difference between Gen Xers and Gen Ys in the workforce, and how, Gen Xers, we work to live, or we live to work, and Gen Yers work to live. And there's quite a difference in communication in the workforce. And, is Gen Y just driving Gen Xers nuts? Our guest this hour is Gail Goodman. She is the phone teacher. Good morning, Gail. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us here on KGO. What the heck's going on with I'm a Gen Xer. What's going on with Generation Y? What's going on with them in the workforce? Why don't they ever call anybody? You're the phone teacher. Why don't they ever call anybody?
Because they didn't need to. When they communicate with each other, they communicate digitally, so they're much more used to typing than talking. And Gen Xers may be getting a little frustrated with them, but baby boomers are ready to kill them.
And why are baby boomers ready to kill them?
Well, baby boomers grew up with telephones. We've had to adapt to the digital world. And I think that baby boomers and Gen Xers are somewhat on the same page. It's almost like the three bears when you think about the three generations. Boomers prefer the phone but have adapted to digital worlds. The people in the middle, which are the Gen Xers, have a little bit of the phone skills because they were brought up by the boomers, but they are also highly digital. And then you've got these little millennials trotting into the picture, and they're almost always digital. But it's a challenge in a corporation where getting on the phone is a critical part of their job.
Yeah. And, what do you make of how the Gen Y, they've grown up in the digital generation, obviously texting and everything else. How has that affected communication, and how will it affect future communication? I mean, because, they're the future. I'll be the past. Boomers are the past. So how is this going to affect communication in the future?
I don't know if I'll be around to find out the full impact. By the time they're in charge of all the corporations, I don't think I'm going to be here.
We're not even going to be talking to each other.
They're already creating a lot of stress. There's a lot of stress.
And so I've been a manager in several different jobs. I've managed several different people. And I'm starting to notice it here in my day job where I work, where, a Gen Y will want to come in and they'll want to tell me how they're feeling, and they'll want to discuss maybe a change with me. And, of course, I'm polite about it, and, of course, I take it into consideration. But in the back of my head, I'm sitting there saying, you just started here last week. What makes you think you know how the things are run, and what makes you think you have a say on what's going on?
It's funny because my friend who has a daughter that's a millennial is also in a situation where she wants to have an accommodation in a corporation where she just went from being an intern to being a paid worker in the stockroom. And she's working her way up. But the fact is that her perception already is, what are you going to do for me? And the people that own the business, who are also going to be Gen Xers or Boomers, their attitude is, but you haven't done anything for me yet, dear. Yeah. And that's the problem, is their perception of the corporate world is that it's not to be trusted. And think about the years that they've grown up in. I mean, starting with Enron all the way up to people that pollute our waters and then try not to pay the lawsuits by the people in the Mississippi area that can't drink their water. So they don't have a corporate trust, and they want to get as much as they can out of each experience and then go on to the next one. They don't expect to stay at a corporation for 30 years like my dad or the way your family may have.
Mm-hmm. So how are we to relate? Obviously, we're on their, obviously, since they were raised this way and they're going to be running things in the future, you could say it's up to us to adapt.
The thing that everybody's got to realize is everybody brings something to the table that's of value. There's no doubt that the older members of your corporation are going to learn some digital shortcuts from these young people coming in, and we really should embrace some of their creative ideas. At the same time, you need to have a conversation with them about what your real expectations are of their job when they're hired. I think that there's an assumption sometimes, and I don't want you to get all kinds of hate mail from this, but when you hire somebody, if you're not super duper clear, you're going to have to be on the phone. Now, admittedly, somebody who's looking for a job is going to yes you to death, but once you hire somebody, you obviously like them for some reason or you wouldn't hire them. You have to make sure that they're trained and they know exactly what they have to do. If you find out that somebody that you hired who has to get on the phone, A, won't get on the phone, B, is untrainable, C, is stubborn, you got yourself the wrong person.
Yeah.
But I think that there might be a way to communicate and build their repertoire by saying to them, it's more valuable for you to have this as one of your skill sets in addition to me learning how to text.
That's true. Well, I mean, I look at my stepfather, who's in his 70s now, and he's one of the most tech-savvy people I've ever met, but that was because he ran businesses and he had to adapt. But you don't see that among people in their 70s these days. They're not even going to worry about it anymore. Let's go to the phone lines. What's that?
Depends. It depends, because my 87-year-old mother learned how to text because she wants to talk to her 26-year-old daughter.
And that's exactly what my dad.
So if you've got a motivation to speak to your grandchild, you're going to learn email, and then you're going to learn texting, and you may even join Facebook because your love of that grandchild is going to motivate you. The problem is, how do we motivate the millennials to move into some of the old-fashioned things, because human-to-human communication is never going to go out of style.
And how do we do that?
Well, patiently. Really patiently. I mean, my niece could probably get on the phone and tell you how many hundreds of times I've said to her, I didn't understand a word you said. Slow down. Are you going to talk to people that way when you're a doctor? Because she's in medical school. And I've already slowly started to correct her and let her know you cannot talk with this rapidity I mean, they just all garble their words, talk so fast, and, you know, there's all this kind of like Valley Girl stuff going on. And as my niece has gotten older, I have stepped in and corrected her because she's going to be out in the workforce. More importantly, she's going to be an authority figure as a physician.
Yeah, and you know what drives me nuts, and I do it jokingly sometimes, but when I hear people walking around and they'll say LOL or LMAO or LMFAO, you know, and it's just communicate properly. I'm not texting you right now. We're not on Twitter. Just communicate properly. It drives me up the wall.
I think that people who have young people in their office need to read their emails and check that they're not using texting language on an email that needs to be in like real complete sentences.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that. Let's go to Donna.
Yeah, they're doing that too.
Let's go to Donna standing by on line 1. How you doing, Donna?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I found this very interesting as somebody who was born at the beginning of the baby boom generation and then had my first child when I was 20, and I guess that makes them Xers, and they've got the strong work ethic. My daughters are very independent. They have no children, but I've seen where this Generation Y, a lot of the Xer parents wanted to make things easier for their kids. The big thing was everybody got a prize. It was all about self-esteem in our school system. They went to, social promotion. You didn't have to, make the grade by the end of the school year. Oh, we'll pass you anyway.
Yeah.
So they've got this attitude that they're entitled.
Yeah.
And this is what I have seen, and these young people who do not communicate, parents have to teach them to communicate, but you've got so many parents, what do? They're texting their kids.
Yeah.
That's how they communicate, and you lose that social contact, that one-on-one contact, because when you talk to somebody on the phone, you can make it very personal.
Yeah.
If you need help, if you need information, you can express your gratitude.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, to bother you. I know.
Donna, I'm sorry to bother you. We're speaking live with Gail Goodman. She is the phone teacher. The difference between Gen X and Gen Y, we'll keep you through to the break, Gail, if that's okay with you. KGO, the place to turn for traffic on the 5s. Mark Richards standing by at the KGO traffic desk. Matt Ray sitting in KGO Radio 810, taking your calls at 80-8810. The clash of generations within the workplace, specifically Gen X and Gen Y, and we're talking to the phone teacher, Gail Goodman. And Gail, before we went to the break, you had talked about checking the emails of the Gen Ys and making sure they're not communicating via email in texting language, such as LOL, that kind of thing. What else should business managers be doing as far as keeping an eye on these Gen Ys?
Well, and this is very old-fashioned, but if you're asking somebody who's a Gen Y to write a real letter, I would check that also. I think that their general communication, they've learned another shorthand of English. As your other guest is saying, they're so self-centered, they think everybody's going to think their world is the right world by giving them all trophies all the time and making the world adapt to them. They just assume that attitude when they come into corporations. So I think that if you don't check what they write, you don't check how they talk on the phone, you might find them not representing your company the way you want to be represented, and that could be tragic.
You mentioned, they grew up with Enron and they grew up with BP, that kind of thing. What do they think of us, though, in the workplace as far as, maybe not trusting us, but I just wonder what their thinking is of the Gen Xers like myself who, I believe you got to work hard to get to the top. And like I mentioned earlier in the article, when the boss says jump, you ask, was that high enough? I wonder what their thinking is when they see us interact in the workplace.
I don't know if they necessarily want to model us, but I think that Gen Xers can really be great models and mentors for Gen Ys. I think that they appreciate learning the stuff that they can't get on the Internet. And if there is a mentoring opportunity, I think that's the best way to influence them, is to really befriend them, really get to know how they think, and in their world explain why what you're suggesting might get them what they want.
Was it just technology that happened, or, was there, parenting involved here, too, a change in parenting along the way?
Well, there's definitely a difference in the way people have parented each generation. And there's certainly a perception that everybody made these young people believe the world revolves around them and they are the sun. That's a problem when you have to go into a work environment and it's a team. You're not at the helm. They don't learn that things are pyramidal, but you're not at the top. In fact, you're at the bottom. Yeah. They don't get that. And they need to be taught how to understand the corporation. The problem also, I think, which is a completely different thought, but I think throws into the pot here, they have role models like Zuckerberg, where they think, I can do something extraordinary. And it's very, very hard to have to tell somebody you're ordinary.
When you said that, I was just thinking of all of these so-called quote-unquote stars on YouTube these days, and all of the stars across all of the different mediums we have now, and how your followers on Twitter mean you're something these days.
Well, the other problem is that there's so much of the reality shows on television, and the role models are also highly self-centered, narcissistic, out-of-control people. Yeah. And, I grew up around Father Knows Best and Dick Van Dyke, and now you're watching other kind of shows, and I don't want to say anything nasty about shows that I don't like, but I think that there is
the Kardashians.
modeling of nice. Yeah, you just said it. Thank you.
No worries.
You can become famous if you're beautiful enough, if you have a great sex tape, and if your family is outrageous enough. And that, to me, is not a role model. I mean, Honey Boo Boo, really? Come on.
Yeah. Gail, we appreciate your time as always.
Thank you for inviting me, Matt.
All right. Gail Goodman is the phone teacher. The website is phoneteacher.com. Have you run across this in your workplace? Have you run across this in public? Different set of motivations, different lifestyle, a desire for a different sort of work environment. 415-808-0810 is the number. 808810 is the number. And, when she mentioned Zuckerberg, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago here on KGO, and the CEOs of these tech companies, the founders of these tech companies, where they're just ticking people off by what they're throwing out there about the homelessness in San Francisco, and they really don't care what people think about them. 415-808-0810 is the number. 808810 is the number. I was raised to work hard, learn everything you can about a business, and you'll move forward, and you'll move up. And so far, it's worked for me. I mean, I was told, look, if the guy at the radio station needs the floor mopped in the kitchen, you do it. You learn everything. I've mentored people. I've mentored a lot of people in this business who come in and they just expect to rise to the top. And it's like, wait a minute. None of us, unless you're uber talented, none of us, we couldn't just do that. We weren't able to just jump on the air and rise to the top. There's a different level of expectation. And when she mentioned Zuckerberg, I immediately thought of YouTube, and I immediately thought of the narcissism and how many people have hit up your YouTube video these days, and how many people follow you on Twitter, and how many people follow you on Facebook. It's just a different way of thinking. And if you're a member of Gen Y, I'd love for you to call in, because I'm not trying to bash on Gen Y. Believe me, I'm not. Like I said, they're the future, and I believe that we have to adapt to them because, frankly, they're going to be running things. But like Gail said, they have to adapt to us as well, because there has to be a happy medium in the workforce. 415-808-0810 is the number. 808810 is the number. Also in this Forbes article, there's a different concept of progress on a project. Gen Xers, they famously bemoan the flakiness of millennials. They suggest that this is actually a result of speaking a language that millennials aren't wired to understand. Millennials move through things quickly. You heard Gail say that. They talk quickly. They think very quickly. They're used to doing a lot of things at once. The upshot is that they may deliver a prototype when the Gen X manager expects a more polished, finished prototype. In that case, the manager needs to communicate the needs more clearly while also understanding that the millennial appreciates regular feedback and coaching throughout the progress. That drives me nuts. That drives me up the wall. Up the wall when I tell somebody to do something, and maybe it's my expectations, but they don't do it, and I'm sitting here going, What else do you need from me to get this accomplished? Let's go to Tracy standing by on line 1. How you doing, Tracy?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. What can we do for you this morning?
Well, I just wanted to call your guest just really brought on a whole new wave of frustration for me as a business owner. I deal with this all the time, and I find that I'm having to coach employees just in their direct emails to me as their employer.
Wow.
Using the text short language,
Sure.
writing dem, D-E-M instead of them.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy.
I'm sorry.
It is. It's crazy, and you think how are you representing us as a company? And also, what I find, generally speaking, not everybody. It's not. There's some people in that age bracket that have a little bit more maturity, but there's just a sense of entitlement that I can't believe. Yeah. It's always shocking to me.
Well,
I'm finding that I'm praising them just for doing their job.
Yeah, and that's bizarre to me. And I'll bring up an issue here. We talk about entitlement. My daughter is 8 years old. She has homework that she has to do, but guess what? They're not graded on it. They take it to school, and if they've accomplished it, then good job, pat on the back.
That doesn't make any kind of sense to me.
No, none at all to me as well. Tracy, thanks for the call. Let's go to Scott standing by on in Petaluma. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. What can we do for you this morning or this afternoon?
Well, just, I was born in 1982, and so, the first half of my life was pre-internet boom.
Sure.
And then the second half was after, and it feels really weird to me when I see these articles talking about quote-unquote millennials, and they're lumping me in with someone who's like 16 now.
Yeah.
And, when I was graduating high school was the year 2000, and so I have a very different experience. I've been a working professional for the last decade, and it's very different to see me lumped in with someone who's just graduating high school now.
Well, Scott, I can tell you I'm a Gen Xer, and when I would see the articles about me and when we would discuss Generation X in high school and college, I thought it was weird too. I thought, what? Wait a minute, what? I'm part of this? No, that's not how I think of myself. Yeah, it's very weird to be discussing yourself, but you wouldn't.
Well,
go ahead.
So I was just going to say, and the interesting thing now will be to see what the current generation, the kids who are like in 5th grade, 4th grade now as complete digital natives, how they will be in 10 years and how we will view them.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, I appreciate the call. We're up against the clock. KGO, the place to turn for news, and let's go to Mary Liz Cortese, who's standing by at the KGO News Desk.